Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, a double-barreled bad, and a crazy martini for conservative today. All of it brought to you by Lending Club. Go to lendingclub.com/martini. A little bit more on them a little bit later in the podcast. Jim, let's begin with our good martini. And I believe this was a good martini a week or two ago when we were talking about the decision of Republican leaders to bring the Democratic legislation that would abolish ICE to the floor for a vote. That actually happened, and here's how it played out. This is the Washington Examiner. Most House Democrats voted present Tuesday on a resolution aimed at forcing them to clarify whether they support U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, after some Democrats have criticized the agency's role in enforcing U.S. immigration laws. The House passed a non-binding resolution saying lawmakers support the officers and personnel who carry out the important mission of the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A two-thirds majority was needed to pass it, and because Democrats voted present instead of no, it passed easily in a 244-35 vote. The final vote saw just 18 Democrats vote for the resolution, and 34 Democrats actually voted against it. But the vast majority of Democrats, 133 of them, voted present. So, Jim, of the Democrats who actually did vote yes or no on this thing, it was almost 2-1 voting against support for ICE, which is obviously making the Democrats look horrible. But most of them pulled an Obama here and voted present, which makes this a pretty good issue for Republicans going forward.
Call me crazy, Greg. I actually think this is the worst possible option when you're confronted with a issue that is thorny or complicated. I think if the average House Democrat, and by the way, most of them, if you're still a House Democrat, you're probably in a safe district because you didn't get wiped out in 2016 or in 2014. You can probably go back to your constituents and say, yes, I voted to support ICE on that resolution because no matter how much I disagree with the policies of this administration, I understand that everyone involved in ICE has a risky job and they do an important work for this country, and I wanted to salute them. Or you can flip it around and say, you know what, while I realize there are many good men and women who work for ICE, I could not sign on to that resolution because I find the policy of separating children from their parents so fundamentally unjust, so counter to our values, that I could not sign on to that resolution at that time. And you take your lumps either way, but I think, particularly for an incumbent Democrat, either one of those positions is probably survivable. Present is not survivable. Present is, I can't decide. You'd send me there to make the tough calls, and I'm not going to make this tough call. And, look, we'll see if this ends up costing any House Democrats. There's probably about a half dozen that could be in danger in this cycle, even in the context of the Democratic wave. These are seats where, Trump won, but they hung on in 2016. But again, it's only a handful of them who would have that kind of if I vote this way, this could add fuel to the fire for folks who want to unseat me, et cetera, et cetera. Really kind of embarrassing for the Democrats that so many of them chose to vote present. If they wanted to say, look, we want to change ICE policies, but we don't want to abolish the organization, fine. The thing is, the people who are out there protesting honestly believe they're protesting to abolish ICE, that they want to end immigration enforcement. Once you get too far past the Border Patrol, and heck, if you ask these people, do you want to abolish the Border Patrol? I bet you can get a good chunk of them saying, yeah, I'm for that too. There's a chunk of the Democratic Party's grassroots activists who don't believe that there should be immigration enforcement. And this is kind of we talked about last week, a creative way for Republicans to try to spotlight the divisions, to heighten the contradictions, as the old communists used to say. And most Democrats, when confronted with this, chose to punt. And I think that's kind of a very much an embarrassing moment for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well played, Republican leaders. All right, let's move on to, as I said, a two-fisted bad martini here, and it's both are related to the economy. Starting with the Wall Street Journal, the Trump administration expects annual budget deficits to rise nearly $100 billion more than previously forecast in each of the next 3 years, pushing the federal deficit above $1 trillion starting next year. The revisions, which went largely unnoticed when the White House submitted its annual update to Congress last week, reflect the cost of federal spending increases agreed to earlier this year and higher interest payments. The budget proposal released in February showed annual deficits totaling $7.1 trillion over 10 years. The latest revisions increased these cumulative deficits by $926 billion to $8 trillion. And then over at Bloomberg, judging by the number of Americans on food stamps, it doesn't feel like one of the best job markets in almost half a century and the second longest economic expansion on record. Enrollment in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as food stamps, fell to 39.6 million in April, the most recent government data show. That's down from a record 47.8 million in 2012, but as a share of the population, it's just back to where it was as the economy emerged from the longest and deepest downturn since the Great Depression. While robust growth is a bragging point for President Donald Trump and a campaign theme for Republicans trying to break a historical pattern by keeping control of the House and Senate in midterm elections, the rising tide isn't lifting all boats. So, Jim, some say that it just takes time for the tax cuts to kick in more, and then people lower down will eventually get jobs or get better jobs, and they'll be able to remove themselves from government assistance. But we've talked about this before. We talked about it when the expectation for Medicare to go bankrupt got moved up to 8 years from now. We like to see fiscal responsibility, and perhaps the train's so far out of the station there's not a lot we can do about it anymore, but we're not making much progress, that's for sure.
Yeah, Greg, there's a unfortunate fact of life that expansions cannot continue forever. It's just a matter of the way the economies work, international factors, fuel prices, all kinds of different things. At any given moment, your era of good times will come to an end. Interest rates, all kinds of factors go into it. Obviously, administrations and governments and the Fed all do their best to kind of keep the good times going as long as possible. But it's just the nature of things. Inevitably, you overexpand. Somebody gets overextended. Loans go bad. Things happen, and the economy slows down. Now, hopefully, you get a mild recession. But I'm going to take you really back down memory lane, Greg. You may recall back in 1992 when the country threw out George H.W. Bush for the disastrous economy. Yeah. The unemployment went all the way to 6%.
Whoa.
Yeah, of course, 6% was nothing. It was the good times. By the time the Obama administration had, when it went north of 10%, that's you hope to have your recessions as mild and short as possible, and to have your boom times as good and high and long lasting as possible. Well, we've had a pretty darn good one. It's likely that the tax cuts will keep them going for some time longer, but we know it's going to run out eventually. And if this is what the food stamp number is when unemployment is below 4%, that worries me. That is a number that really stands out, because as people are getting more of these jobs, they should no longer be needing food stamps anymore. That ties into another point that we talked on a couple of occasions about. Unemployment rate is down. Job creation numbers are great. That's all really good to see. Wage growth is okay, generally, not quite what we'd like it to see. The job creation rate is expanding faster than the wage growth. People pointed out that as jobs came back during and after the Great Recession, generally people were going back for jobs with pay that was either lower or about the same. Wage growth has been pretty low for a while. And I remember I was on CNN not that long ago where they pointed out Midwestern employers talking about how much they wanted to bring in young workers back from the coasts, and they wanted to bring retirees out of retirement, and they wanted to make this area a place to people wanted to move to. And I looked up the numbers for the state of Wisconsin, and they'd actually gone down very, very slightly. I believe $5, $10 a week or something like that compared to in 2017 than they had in 2016. Now, the good news is the unemployment rate, I believe, is below 3% in Wisconsin. There's no shortage of jobs, but employers have not really raised wages. And I was like, well, if you want to bring back more workers, guys, try paying people more. That usually is what works. That generally is the sort of thing that appeals there. So that's kind of annoying. The food stamp numbers are annoying. And the deficit, look, we knew that when you pass a big tax cut, people are paying lower tax rates. People are going to see more money in their pockets. That's money that otherwise would be going to the government. But the hope was that economic growth would mitigate that more people would be making these higher wages, investing more, spending more, paying more in sales tax, all kinds of different things that would do their part to increase revenue to these governments. And that's not happening. And I think it's safe to say that of all the areas of fiscal policy that Republicans used to care about, we've really dropped the ball and completely forgotten to get concerned about the deficits and the debt. You can argue about whether that's justified, considering how voters tend to punish you if you talk too much about deficits and the debt because they'd rather not hear about it. But that too, it's going to be a point where we're going to have to start worrying about the deficit numbers. And it's worth noting, we gave Obama a lot of grief about this. I would say very much justifiably so. But this is at a point when the economy had collapsed, Wall Street had collapsed, and we were in really bad years of recession. These are not really bad years of recession. These are the good times, and we have $1 trillion a year deficits, which means at some point when this boom ends, at some point if economic growth slows, which is going to happen inevitably, maybe this year, hopefully not, maybe next year, hopefully not, but it's very likely that either in Trump's last year or in the early years of his second term, depending on how things shake out, that you're going to have a recession. It's just the nature of things. If these numbers are this way when we're in good times, they're going to look really bad when a recession hits. And it's a really ominous indicator at some point on the horizon, whether it's, the not too distant future or hopefully at least best case scenario a couple of years down the road.
Jim, there's been a lot of jokes going on after the president got out of the Iran deal and the Paris climate deal that he was dismantling Obama's legacy. $1 trillion deficits apparently are here to stay. Obama liked to say that he inherited $1 trillion deficits because of the Wall Street bailout and all that happened right before he came in. But then he jacked it up with the stimulus and then somehow kept a $1 trillion deficit the next year just in regular budgeting. Came down underneath $1 trillion for a little while, and now we're back up. This was a big issue that derailed the Republican majority in 2006, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's focused on quite a bit this year as well.
Well, we warned them.
That's right. We've been telling them for years. All right. But the United States might be in a tremendous amount of debt, and taxpayers will be on the hook for it. But when it comes to your personal debt, you've got some better options. For decades, credit cards have been telling us, buy it now and pay for it later. Sound familiar, federal government? With interest. Despite your best intentions, that interest can get out of control fast.
And we don't just mean for the U.S. Treasury. We mean for you, too.
Yes. But
with Lending Club, you can consolidate your debt and pay off credit cards with one fixed monthly payment. Since 2007, Lending Club has helped millions of people regain of their finances with affordable fixed-rate personal loans. No trips to a bank, no high-interest credit cards. Just go to lendingclub.com, tell them about yourself and how much you want to borrow, pick the terms that are right for you, and if you're approved, your loan will be automatically deposited into your bank account in as little as a few days. Lending Club is the #1 peer-to-peer lending platform with more than $35 billion in loans issued.
Go to lendingclub.com/martini. Check your rate in minutes and borrow up to $40,000. That's lendingclub.com/martini. Lendingclub.com/martini. All loans made by WebBank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. And even better, you don't have to go through appropriations committees or the filibuster rules in the Senate. It's all pretty good. All right, on to our crazy martini now, Jim. This is courtesy of USA Today. And for everything that came out of the Trump-Putin summit, this has probably not gotten as much attention as it otherwise would have had it not been for the comments about the intel community. But here's what USA Today writes. The White House confirmed Wednesday that Trump was considering a proposal from the Russian president to allow Kremlin officials to question former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul and other individuals in exchange for allowing U.S. investigators to sit in on the questioning of 12 Russians indicted on charges of trying to undermine the 2016 U.S. election. The arrangement, which Trump called an incredible offer, has been condemned by critics and dubbed absolutely absurd by the State Department. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the request had been discussed, but there, quote, wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States. And, Jim, you focus on this quite a bit in the Morning Jolt today. Good job by Heather Nauert over at the State Department, I assume reflecting the strong views of Secretary Mike Pompeo over there. Jim, not only should we have zero interest in bartering with the Russians when we've got 12 of their people under a federal indictment, but this should never be on the table when it comes to U.S. personnel like Ambassador McFaul.
It's worth noting, Greg, when Mueller indicted those 12 Russians connected with the military intelligence unit of Russia, we know we're never going to get those guys. We know that Russia's never going to agree to extradite them. It's conceivable if they ever traveled out of the country or into the United States, we might be able to nab them or arrest them. But chances are those 12 people are going to live very comfortably in Russia for the rest of their lives and never really pay any serious price for their efforts involving in hacking or undermining the U.S. election. there's backstory to this. The backstory to this is that Vladimir Putin absolutely hated Ambassador Michael McFaul. He was Obama's man in Moscow. We could have political disagreements with McFaul. I actually don't think there's that much if you're a Russia hawk. There's a certain argument to be made that, that Putin just kind of decided he needed a face of the big, mean, scary United States, and McFaul was as good as anybody. Lots of harassment of McFaul in Moscow. That's not exactly wildly unprecedented when it comes to Russian counterintelligence agencies and the sort of mischief that they play. But they definitely ratcheted it up. Lots of threats of violence and things like that against McFaul. McFaul served his time. He did his time in Moscow, came back to the United States. The Obama administration ended. Putin still hates this guy. And my suspicion is this relates to Putin's belief that in 2011, the United States government was secretly plotting against him in one of those elections where he always wins with like 97% of the vote. All of the non-jailed political opponents somehow accumulate for 3. For some reason, Putin continues to have this paranoid belief that America is working against him and that McFaul is the Rosetta Stone of this whole grand conspiracy. What is frustrating about Trump, and the good news, I doubt Trump will give this that much serious thought once it's all explained to him. But it's nonetheless disturbing to see the President of the United States respond to this and have him call it an incredible offer when it basically is, okay, look, you let us talk. You let us go over to Russia and talk to the 12 people we want, and we'll allow your guy to come over and talk to the former ambassador. Oh, by the way, remember all the folks who tangle with Putin who end up dead because of various radiations and poisons and things like that. Michael McFaul is probably looking over his shoulder every now and then, just because of the sheer nature of tangling with the Russian government. Now, look, all U.S. diplomatic personnel are covered by diplomatic immunity. I realize most of us get our knowledge of that from Lethal Weapon 2. But deep down, there's really, once you've been a U.S. ambassador, McFaul could do almost anything he wants on Russian soil. This is not to say that he did play a role in attempting to affect the Russian election. But, even if he did, the only thing the Russian government can say is we are withdrawing your diplomatic credentials. You have X number of, usually it's 24 hours, sometimes 48, 72 hours to get out of the country. You are persona non grata. We no longer recognize that you are a legitimate diplomat of that foreign country. Very tough to arrest him, very tough to jail him, things like that. Occasionally countries work things out like that. As I pointed out in the Jolt, you've seen, I think it was Malaysia tried Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld in absentia as war crimes, and then announced that they'd convicted them in absentia. And of course, the U.S. State Department told them to go pound sand. The Pentagon negotiates status of forces agreements with host governments to organize when a U.S. service personnel can be tried in a foreign court. Sometimes, very often there's very similar to be a situation where you violate the laws of the host country. Both countries want to avoid a long, messy situation. Very often you'll get shipped back to the United States rather than actually tried and jailed in a foreign country. In other words, when you go to work for the U.S. government in another country, they make a promise to have your back no matter how bad it gets, no matter how long, what hits the fan. So even briefly entertaining this proposal by Putin is violating that promise. I think this would actually set off a firestorm that would make other Trump controversies pale in comparison. The response from the State Department struck me as extremely appropriate. It was a little unnerving that Sarah Huckabee Sanders suggested that this idea was still under discussion. When Putin wants access to an American official, there is a short 2-letter answer of no with the occasional, colorful barnyard expletive used to make that emphatic that no, Russian authorities do not get to question U.S. officials.
Very well said, sir. Yeah, there is a corollary to diplomatic immunity. I believe it's known as Murtaugh's Law.
But you really got to get dead to rights, and you have to have killed several LAPD officers and be involved. I believe wasn't it drug smuggling and gun running and basically every other criminal enterprise in the world, as seen back in Los Angeles in the late 80s.
Yeah,
early 90s.
Yeah, they were smuggling the cash out in these huge, freighter ship crates. And when they saw how much was in there, I believe it was Murtaugh who said, "There's millions, billions, Donald Trump lotto."
Donald Trump lotto, amen. And it was on the other night, Greg, and I was thinking this, he had become part of the vocabulary by the late 80s.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's back when he was eating his pizza backwards with the cheese in the crust. I think he was part of that campaign, too. So, yeah, part of pop culture for 30 years before he ever ran for office. But anyway.
I guess I would point out some of those commercials are enough to make you grimace.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Jim, Tomorrow actually is Friday. We'll see you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And don't forget, if you need help in checking your rate or borrowing up to $40,000, head to lendingclub.com/martini. And tune in again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.